Got it.
Don't know how.
You trying to get rid of that screen that says recording in progress? Is that what's going on?
It's all yours.
Okay. Here we go. Well, this is the Sunday preceding Thanksgiving. So I thought I would talk about that. In this context, I want to give talk about three different kinds of food eating that occurred in the Bible and in our history. I like the Bible to a certain degree. I like to take it and bounce off of it the reality that exists in my own life. And then also remember that this is not about my own life at all and the physical part of it. It's about the spiritual part of it. So the first Thanksgiving type of situation that I want to talk about this morning is the feeding of the 5,000, which is reported to have occurred when Jesus was up on the side of a mountain giving a talk, and all these people gathered to be able to hear what he had to say, because they'd heard about him and they heard, man, this guy is spot on. He's really talking to us. He is awakening us and enlivening us. And he's not talking about starting some kind of agitation or war or anything else. He's talking about teaching us to be who we truly are, loving spiritual beings, gifted to be on this planet by pure grace. So here they are, and they're all listening. And it occurred to Jesus that there needed to be some kind of provision for all these people, because his disciples, those who were the closest to him, were coming up to him and saying, hey, we need to let these people go because they're hungry and they need to leave here and go get something to eat. And Jesus' remark back to the disciples was, well, let's just feed them. Feed them? We don't have anything to feed them with. Well, what do we have? Jesus asked. Well, we've got a few loaves of bread and some basket of fish, and that's it. You know, we were going to eat that. That's ours to eat. Jesus said, bring it to me. It was brought to him. The first thing he did was bless it. After it was blessed, he gave thanks for it, for what was there, in front of the crowd, to display to them that this was a special offering. Then he broke the bread and broke the fish into many pieces and started passing it around amongst the crowd. It stated that this created a miracle being that more food came back after it was passed out to this crowd of 5 than it had started with. There was more fish and more bread. Well, logically, my logical part of my brain says that they saw him willing to share what he had, so they became willing to share what they had just sort of maybe scrounged away for themselves that they were going to eat sort of in private, kind of nibbling here and there so that they wouldn't disturb anybody else. Well, as it turned out, by doing it openly, he created for them a sense in their heart and in the spiritual being of themselves, that there's plenty to go around. All we need to do is just share equally and open ourselves to this situation. Was it a miracle? Maybe not in the increase of physical substance, but the miracle was that minds were changed, hearts were opened. And as a result of this, true thanks could be given for what had just been happening in front of them. What had been created. Well, that's one story of Thanksgiving and about food. The next story is what's called the Last Supper. Now, I find this is strange, and I always had, and I'm sure Donna can relate to this. In today's time, it would have been called the last dinner, because we grew up, Donna and I did, saying breakfast, dinner, and supper. Right, Donna?
Yeah.
Yeah. But what has occurred is times have changed. Now it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What's for dinner? Not what's for supper. So it would have been called the last dinner, but that's just something, that's just an aside. Here's the thing about that story. It's Passover. Jesus has come into town with this same group of disciples, and they have met in an upper room, which they have rented or has been given to them to use. And they're going to have a Seder dinner. They're going to have a Passover dinner. In it, it is reported that what happens is that Jesus takes the bread and breaks it and says, "This is my body. Imagine that this, partake of it." And then he takes the cup and fills it with wine and says, "This is my blood, which shall be shed for you for the remission of all sin." Then after they have had the dinner, they leave singing songs to Zion and prayers, and they go out, and the arrest occurs later in the night and begins the whole process of no longer Passover, but now Passion. The third one I want to talk about, the third thing about eating that I want to talk about, is Thanksgiving, that which we call Thanksgiving. And the tradition has it that the Wampanoag tribe gathered together, the ones who had saved the Pilgrims in 1620 and 1619, actually, from starvation from a hard and early winter the year before. They had shared their food. They had shared their warmth. They had shared what was needed to bind up and protect these people. The next season, when it came time, and a harvest was pretty good this time around, because they'd had time to plant, harvest, they invited the Wampanoag Indians back, led by Squanto, if you remember that name from history, from your history classes, when we were all tiny children, most of us. And they led them back, and they had a huge Thanksgiving feast. They were giving thanks for friendship. They were giving thanks for peace, for protection, for being able to be together, and for a wonderful harvest. And that began a tradition which was been carried on in little pieces here and there throughout the history of the United States and Canada. Canada celebrates on a different day than we do. They celebrate the month before, in October. The first Monday of October is Thanksgiving in Canada. Why? Because it's colder up there, and they brought in their crops earlier. And so as a result, they have a tradition of having a Thanksgiving feast a little bit earlier. Ours has bounced around. It's, was first declared to be a holiday after much struggle to become a holiday by Abraham Lincoln, 1863. Then, and he was celebrating and giving thanks for the Union Army winning battles, plus the fact that the Union was still together. That was his Thanksgiving. And it continued on and bounced around, and there came a time when Franklin Roosevelt, I think it's probably his first, maybe not his first, but in one of his 4 years that he was president, 4 times, by the way, he decided to change the day of Thanksgiving from the fourth Thursday of the month of November to the third Thursday. And the reason he wanted to make this change is because there wasn't enough room to advertise between Thanksgiving and Christmas. He wanted to give the tradespeople more of a chance. Remember, this was during a Great Depression, and he was trying to beef up the economy. Well, that really confused people because he made this declaration in October, and everybody was supposed to suddenly make this change and shift everything. And it occurred that some people didn't like it at all. They stayed with the old one. Some made the choice, grumbling, and called it Franksgiving instead of Thanksgiving. And others decided, well, let's just have both. Let's have a Thanksgiving on the third Thursday and then have one again on the fourth Thursday. Which, yeah, Neil, I like that too. I was like, well, hey, more eating, more fun. That's really what this holiday has boiled down to, though, is a commercial effort to help businesses, in this case, agribusiness. And we sell turkeys by the thousands. By the way, in that first Thanksgiving, it wasn't a turkey. It wasn't a turkey that was the meat. The meat was deer, it was venison, and it was goose, because that's what these people from England had been used to, eating a goose. So that's what they used. They later discovered turkeys were a whole lot better, and you could feed a lot more people on a turkey than you could a goose. That's another aside of mine. Now, here's what I want to talk about all 3 of these that they all have in common. They're not based on the truth. None of them are based on the truth. The idea that 5,000 people were fed with just a few loaves and fishes, and that it was a miracle of abundance and creation, not too likely. It really causes us to be skeptical of such a situation, I think, if we use our common minds. The other one, the idea that at this Last Supper, Jesus is said to have said, "This is my body and broke bread, and this is my blood shed for you." The Gospel of John gets it correctly, and it wasn't written until 100 to 150 years after Jesus had passed from the earth. In it, I'm laughing because I'm watching Patty suddenly jump over there. Okay, in it, in this Last Supper, John gets it correct by saying that Jesus girded himself with a loincloth and proceeded to wash the feet of all his disciples. That is the correct one. And why do I say it's correct and the others are wrong? Because the others are simply repeating what Paul had written in a letter to the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 23. And in it, he states was given to me by God, by the Lord, that it happened this way. So he's telling the people in this letter that it's a vision. It's a vision that was sent to him. Not that it actually happened that way. It was a vision that was given to him. Now, if you think about it a moment, the Gospels were all written after the letters were written. So the Gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we call them, not John. John didn't use that story, but they included that story that were given to them by this letter to the Corinthians, because the letters came first in time. The letters were, this particular letter was written about 55 CE. 55 CE. 55 years after Jesus had passed from the earth. 55 years later. If that's the case, and the Gospels weren't written until 70 to 150 years later, obviously, they copied what they had read from the letter and put it into their story, into their gospel. So it didn't happen that way. That's how it happened in a vision to Paul. Then we all know that the story of the thanksgiving and the peace and the loving brotherhood between the Native Americans and the Puritans wasn't so pure, and it wasn't so safe, and it didn't last for very long. So this Thanksgiving idea started and then died quickly. And it took a woman to appeal for 40 years to Congress to establish a day of Thanksgiving in the United States. She wrote letters to the Congress and to other members of state legislatures for 40 years before it could finally be accepted. Now, I've left you now at this point with, oh gosh, feeling, I'm sure, for every one of us. It kind of creates it for me too. But that's only because we are not understanding the real meaning of these three stories. These three stories, understood on a physical level, are rather disappointing. But on a spiritual level, they're true. Every one of them are true. The understanding is this: fish represent thoughts. Fish represents spiritual thoughts. That's why the fish was used as the first symbol of the believers in the story of Jesus. The fish. It's very important to take that into mind, that when this is broken up, these fish were broken up. It's as though on a spiritual level, what we're saying is fish, spiritual thoughts, dispersed, broken up into pieces amongst all the thoughts that exist in our mind, the 5,000. It's very important. So is the number 5. The 1,000 represents the vast quantity. The 5 represents our senses in the physical world, the 5 senses. 5 times 1,000. 5 growing out of the physical into the spiritual. Fish, passing these fragments out into our physical thoughts that we have in our mind, so that we no longer spend our time locked into the idea that all there is what we see in front of us. But there's something greater and grander. The bread The bread represents life itself. Jesus broke the bread at both of these meals. He broke it open so that it could be dispersed amongst us. Life given to each one of us, shared by each one of us with one another. You know, if you were the only person on this planet, you would not only, first of all, you wouldn't be lonely because you wouldn't know that anything else existed or anyone else existed. But what you would be is stuck. I would be stuck if I was alone. You will be stuck if you are alone. No spiritual growth, no need, no understanding, no challenge, nothing. Simply existing rather than fully living. We fully live when we recognize the importance of ourselves blending with one another. That's when we really begin to live, is when we recognize that each one of us is important. Each one of us is equal. Each one of us is something that we can learn from, that we can express our understanding to, sharing wisdom, sharing life, sharing with one another. This is what creates Thanksgiving. This is what creates abundance and a sense of fulfillment in our lives, is recognizing spiritual thoughts existing in our minds and sharing them, breaking the bread of life for one another. You know, it was very important that all of these stories were told, whether they are true in the physical sense or not. They are very true in the sense that we have in our spiritual existence. They're very true. And truth is what keeps us going, isn't it? It keeps us going, keeps us growing, keeps us getting stronger. The day of Thanksgiving in this country and in any country, whatever day that might be, is a very important chance to stop and recognize the abundance that exists in our lives. Stop and recognize the importance of our families, our friends, all of us in this nation. We'll have a special day on Thanksgiving, and it's more than just eating turkey, taking a nap, and watching some football. It's much more than that, if we stop and think and recognize it. God bless. Yay! Come on, Alan. Give me your signs. Yay.
Thank you, Terry. I'm glad you talked about Thanksgiving, because the two words in there obviously of a time of thankfulness, but also a time of giving.
At a time of giving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a very important time in our lives, that not just on one day, but we're at a point in time in history of human race, I believe, of maybe realizing we're not thankful enough for what we have. We seem to be fairly good complainers of what we think we don't have. And it's also a time
Good
to
point.
think about giving more than just one day a year or one specific special occasion. So thank you for your message. So everybody unmute your screens if you feel like you have something to share, and we'll continue the recording just for a few minutes, and then we'll conclude our story here today, our session, with some special music, and we'll see what happens. So raise your hand if you have something to share.
I just want to share this, if you want to make note of it. That I talked about the vision that the Apostle Paul had. It's 1 Corinthians 11, verse 23. So you might want to remember that. Go and check it out for yourselves. And you'll go, holy cow, how could that have been? And the fact that the letters came first and then the Gospels were written later. Okay. Because the Bible isn't, it's laid in there with the Gospels first and then the letters afterwards.
So the letters weren't delivered by email, right? So they didn't have the internet. So it took a while to get the news around.
It did take a while. It took a while. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So did you all get the email?
Hey,
Go ahead.
It was First Corinthians in what chapter? What?
1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse
Sorry.
23.
Okay,
Okay. Talk to me.
that's amazing. I loved every second of it, and I have some family who say none of that stuff is true, so hogwash. And these are young people that read the history and say none of it's true, so it's all hogwash. And they're looking at it through the five senses.
Right.
And they're looking at it through a lens of what they can see and feel and touch and what's around them, and the tragedies and the strife and the war and all of that. And I, in my heart, I don't know how to answer them. And now I do.
Well, the other part of it is this: it's even if it isn't true, let's say this, even if it is true, they ask this question: how's that relevant to me in my life?
Right.
Even if it did happen exactly like you're telling us, how's that important to me? So you really have to look beneath the surface and see the spiritual understanding. That's what metaphysics is all about. And that's why I like metaphysics. It's going beneath the surface to get the spiritual meaning of it, and then it's relevant in your own life.
It's so perfect. All throughout I went to graduate school in my late 60s and graduated when I was 70. And I had a mentor and a supervisor in my training who was a great man. And he said, we are nothing without each other. And the thing about that is that over and over and over throughout life and understanding and the Bible and Christianity and all other religions and people of all over the world, we really are nothing without each other. And I love the part where we talk about the Thanksgiving and being a part of family and friends and the people who grow the food and the turkeys who give their life. So, yeah. I love that part.
Thanks, Patty. It's kind of how I feel about this morning. And the word for today is grace. We are truly graced to have you all with us today, because I wouldn't say that individually we're nothing, but together, the collective, our community has been together for quite some time, and we are important to each other. So it's nice to see everybody here today. Really very pleased with those who've taken the time to come in, and know that we are blessed together, and as well as individually. So thank you for joining us. So someone else?
Terry, back in the time of Jesus, if you weren't Jewish, what were you?
Gentile.
Muslim?
Well, you were considered Gentile. Like which way do you want to look at it? If you are Jewish, you view everyone else as Gentile.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But if you are Gentile, you might have any number. You might be a follower of Mithra. You may be a follower of Isis. You may be a follower of Ishtar. You may be a follower of Hercules. There was so many different people that you could be a follower of, because there were heroes all over the place.
I'd be a follower of Hercules because I look like him.
Okay, Alan, remember that there's always that saying, the analogy of Jew-ish.
You-ish, yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of other
Yeah.
disciplines inside the Judaism. But if you're ish, then, you're subject to everything.
Right.
Well, not to be outdone by my wife, I'm a late learner, and I heard yesterday. I got my master's in YouTube yesterday, and the story I heard was about this Thanksgiving, and that the settlers were wearing armor and things like that because this was life or death for them. They were aware that they had to make peace with the savages, or they're going to be meat for dinner. And but at any rate, they even had a 7-pound vest made out of tin that the guy said you can strap it on, and it's got leather straps so you can tighten it. And at any rate, the leader of that tribe came to the meeting, and before the gunfire started, that they had their muzzle loaders, and it was one shot and then a half an hour to reload. The Indians said, we would like to help you and make peace with you and avoid this. And we brought along some turkeys and grain, etc.
Goose.
Goose, yeah. I don't know.
Geese, yeah.
I wasn't there. I learned that yesterday too. At any rate, I love you all, man. That's been fun, and your messages, as usual, are just fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for sharing us the gospel of YouTube. We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So anybody else would like to share their thoughts before I close the recording?
Well, I just want to say I'm extremely thankful for this group. Sometimes we're like 6 people, and sometimes like today we're 10, and I'm thankful for every one of you.
We're thankful for you, my dear.
Mhm.
You have been
We
a
love you.
consistent presence, and we love you.
And there's our favorite lady, Natasha.
Yes.
Oh, there she is.
And we're thankful for Terry and Natasha and for everybody. So I'm going to close out the recording and we'll finish.
Yeah, wait, I want to say something. I feel like I'm in such a delay on this iPhone, but I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to hear you again, Terry, and see Natasha, and just love you guys so much. You're in my thoughts. I know in all of our thoughts, and what you're facing at this time, and I just love your historian self, Terry. It just really sets a lot of things straight and corrects a lot of things, that were taught from the past. And I've always really thought a lot of that. You're so helpful in helping us get clarity. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Donna.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. You'll have the opportunity to give us even more clarity next weekend.
Isn't that soon?
We'll see.
Donna, you're next weekend?
I guess. I haven't
Next
looked at my calendar.
Yeah.
Well,
I
if
think
I'm wrong, then
Thanks for telling me.
yeah,
I think it'll be you, and then I'm right back again on December 4th.
yeah. So, as you know, Terry was good enough to fill in for Linda, who was traveling overseas, and she got sick when she came back, and really bad cold. So under the weather, and Terry filled in.
Yeah, so
I'm glad that we could have you, especially with a Thanksgiving talk, because we go through our weeks doing our thing and a million different things every day and to-do lists, and then we're blessed to be able to have a community on Sunday to come together and understand what it is, what life really is, not the stuff necessarily that takes place from Monday through Saturday. But there are obviously more important things.
Yeah.
Community, spiritual community.
I
Go ahead.
just want to say I'm so grateful you guys
got to meet Joe today.
I'm grateful to be
Love
Joe.
here.
my
I'm here
life,
too. Yay.
my spiritual partner. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
Happiness, happiness to both of you. Yeah.
We're glad to have everybody. So let's close out the recording. And then those that would like to add without being recorded are free to speak amongst yourselves. So, hold on.
I would like to say that